knowing your numbers could potentially increase your life expectancy.
How healthy are we inside? It's not just how we look outside that's important. If you have 3 to 5 of those readings that are abnormal, then you've got metabolic syndrome. But more importantly, they are an indication of how well your body is responding to insulin, one of the most important hormones in the body. Sleep is one of the most important adjustments you can make to improve your overall health. Has significant effects on 4 of the major causes of the reduction in our lifespan.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. And today with me, Dr. Bill. Dr. Bill, tell us a bit more about you and your background.
Sure, Phil. Great to be here. Well, I'm a medical practitioner, and for many years I had my own practice in London, and for the final 10 years of that I was the medical director of the health screening unit of the biggest hospital group in the United Kingdom. And health screening is simply the early detection of risk factors for disease before they become a problem, and that gives us potentially the chance to intervene on those risk factors before they cause significant damage or disease.
Your advice to us is know your numbers. So what exactly are these numbers and why are they so important to us and our well-being?
At our age, a lot of us go to our doctors to get regular checkups, blood tests, and other measurements done. Now, a lot of these are just returned as being either normal or abnormal. But there's a combination of 5 in particular, which have always interested me and which have become increasingly important, particularly since probably the mid-80s. And these are your HDL cholesterol, that's the so-called good cholesterol, the triglyceride level. Triglycerides are a means of carrying fat around the body. Your blood pressure, very important. A blood pressure taken properly under the right circumstances so that we get an average of readings, not simply the one blood pressure. Your blood glucose level. That is usually done either as a random or a fasting specimen, but it's extremely important. And the final one, which is not often measured, and the one that people like you and I are quite concerned about, is the waist circumference. In other words, taken at the umbilicus, how many inches do we have around there? And those 5 readings taken together are measurements which constitute the parameters for what is called metabolic syndrome. And if you have 3 of 5 of those readings that are abnormal, then you've got metabolic syndrome.
So why are these measurements in particular so important?
That's a good question. Each of these factors is a risk factor for certain types of disease. For example, cardiovascular disease or stroke, or the presence of type 2 diabetes. But more importantly, they are an indication of how well your body is responding to insulin. Insulin is one of the most important hormones in the body. So what exactly is insulin? Well, it's a hormone produced by the pancreas. And its main function, it has others, is to move glucose molecules from the bloodstream into target cells such as muscle and brain in order to produce energy in those cells so that they can function. Now, sometimes these cells become resistant or deaf, if you like, to the insulin signal. And so the pancreas then produces more insulin in order to solve the problem. Now, if the situation is maintained, then you can get a chronic elevation in the insulin levels in the blood and throughout the body generally. And this is at the root of most of the problems with metabolic syndrome. And the problem with insulin is that it has both good and bad qualities. And high levels of insulin are bad for the body in all sorts of ways. And all of the measurements that I mentioned are indicators of how sensitive your tissues are to insulin. So the presence of high levels of insulin in the body has significant effects on 4 of the major causes of the reduction in our lifespan. And these are cardiovascular disease and stroke, with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, cancer, And of course, diabetes itself, type 2 diabetes, where the body is unable to utilize glucose appropriately.
So this metabolic syndrome, what is it exactly, and what is happening within the body? And why is it so important for us to understand how it's affecting us?
Well, metabolic syndrome has only been recognized recently because it's really only in the last 200, 300 years that we have reached a stage in our nutrition where our genes haven't caught up with our environment. The way our bodies used to function in times of food scarcity, which was pretty much in every age before the time I'm mentioning, was appropriate. We had to store fat against times of starvation. We had to store fat and energy against times of privation. And now we live in an age of abundance where basically we get more than enough nutrition, pretty much all the time. And that's also been associated with a great reduction in the amount that we actually move. So we're now finding ourselves in the situation where we are in general taking in many more calories than we actually need. And our body has not yet genetically adapted to this abundance. So what is happening is that our excess calories are being stored, first of all, appropriately as subcutaneous fat. And then when that particular system is overloaded, it gets stored as visceral fat, because the visceral fat storage is very much greater than the subcutaneous fat storage. And we're getting this overspill into these inappropriate areas, and that is what is causing the problem. There's absolutely no doubt that metabolic syndrome is intimately involved in the production of early cardiovascular disease and stroke, and more importantly, the neurodegenerative diseases. Then it's obviously appropriate for us to try and sidestep that or modify the effect of insulin resistance on our bodies. And the only way we're going to know if we've got it is by looking at the 5 criteria that I mentioned earlier. Now, the purpose of medical screening is to look at stuff that's going to affect what happens in the future. And just because something is not symptomatic does not mean it shouldn't be addressed. And the continuum of metabolic syndrome and the destruction it causes occurs over decades. With any medical screening process, in general, the earlier you detect something, the less impact it's going to have in the long term. Why not know your numbers early? By the time those numbers are even slightly abnormal, the damage is done. So if you can incentivize a population group to get used to regular monitoring of these quite simple parameters, and there are things you can do beyond that, but these simple parameters provide a solid bedrock for knowing how healthy are we inside. It's not just how we look outside that's important. And sure, we're all going to concentrate on muscle bulk, which, by the way, is one of the best predictors of longevity, muscle bulk and muscle strength. So guys, don't stop using those weights, but take notice of the other small factors: your calorie consumption, your diet, your calorie output. What type of calories in some cases?
Can you give us some advice as to what do we do if we do fall within these criteria?
It's more around a motivational thing. How do I want to get healthier, both inside and out? And I'm only going to be able to do that if I know where I am on the scale. And these 5 simple measurements give us a pretty good snapshot of where we are now, but more importantly, where we are likely to be if the situation is left unchecked in a decade or a couple of decades' time.
So Doc, just to kind of round it up, can you just run through those five parameters that we need to look at one more time for us?
Sure. It's blood pressure raised above 130/85, HDL cholesterol level, the high density lipoprotein cholesterol. If that's less than 1 mmol per liter, that's a problem. Triglycerides, if those are more than 1.5 mmol per liter. These measurements differ slightly from lab to lab. Your fasting blood sugar in general shouldn't be above 5.6, and then there's the waist circumference. Anything over 40 inches is a problem. But again, that's not an absolute. It depends on body type, skin type. You know, there are some very fit people with very large waists. But in general, those are the parameters we should be aiming at. And you know, probably the best place to start. We don't move enough. So if you're not exercising, exercise. No matter what level. You know, if you're totally sedentary, just start walking. If you already have an exercise program, look at the aerobic exercise component of that, as well as your weightlifting. Look at your diet. You know, we all know that it's simply energy in versus energy out. That's the simplest way to look at it. So you might need to start tracking your energy in and your energy out. And the most overlooked factor of all, particularly in this modern age, is sleep. The cortisol that is produced by sleep stress is incredibly powerful at screwing up the function of insulin in the body. And that is why, in my mind, and the mind of many other practitioners, sleep is one of the most important adjustments you can make to improve your overall health.
There we have it, guys. Move more, eat less, and recover. Well, guys, thank you for watching. And from myself, Uncle Sal, and Dr. Bill, we'll see you on the next video.